We happen to be, in the 3 weeks. Last Sunday, today is, of course, Monday night, but last week, Sunday, was Shiur B'Tammuz. So that, of course, begins the period of what's called the 3 weeks, and that's the lead up to Tisha B'Av. And so for 3 weeks you have to observe many behaviors which indicate mourning, can't listen to music, and so on. So I thought it was appropriate just to talk a little about that. Some of the very important ideas in Hashkafa about that period of time. And actually, the ideas that I want to share with you would be ideas which are what's called congruent with the ideas that I've been speaking about. The whole concept of the Satan and how he survives, and the concept of redemption, the Geula, how it comes, and so on. So I've dealt extensively so far with that. So there are certain ideas that I feel I would like to speak about to lend a greater clarity in terms of what the 3 weeks are, and the redemption, the exile, and so on. Now, what's very interesting is a certain phenomenon. Now, last week, I had spoken a very important shiur. It's the Great Reset Part 2, and part of the shiur was devoted to understanding the nature of the Satan. And just a brief restatement of that. But we know the Satan is a malach, an angel that is in charge of din, justice, and he's appointed by God to do that. Therefore, he has 3 jobs: to tempt a person to sin, and then if a person does sin, in that role he's called the Yetzer Hara, and he's also the great prosecutor, where he will prosecute a person in the court, and in that role he's called the Satan. First role he's called the Yetzer Hara, and in the second role he's called the Satan, and of course in the third role he's called the Malach HaMoves, which means that he's responsible for the execution of the law, or whatever the consequences of the sin is. We know that. Also, what is unique about the Satan, which I explained in the last year, is that the Satan is the only malach, angel, that grows or can be diminished. All other malachim are stable, which means that they will always be exactly as they were created. No more, no less. There's no way for them to increase the capacity of their being in any way. But the Satan can, which is a very, very unique position. And I went into this last week, that he can do this. And what is critical is that the only other being really that can grow also are the Jews. The Jews can grow or diminish, same idea. And of course it depends if they do the will of God. So these ideas are very important. Now what is also important, which I had mentioned last year, the shiur, the Great Reset Part 2, is that we have an unusual relationship with the Satan. That in order for the Satan to grow, right, he must have a certain kedusha. He has to take it from God. And those are called the sparks of holiness. And he needs that. He's got to feed on that to grow. If he's denied that, then he will cease to exist, which is very interesting. So therefore the Satan clearly can be annihilated because of that. And he gets those sparks from the Jews. Because when a Jew does a mitzvah, he brings down the sparks of holiness, which is part of the energy or the light of the spheres, right? The 10 spheres and so on. So he brings down that energy. And if the Jew sins, then we know that, of course, the Satan can take from that energy, and then he grows himself. And therefore, of course, he, being a being that can change and grow, obviously that becomes a primary motive of the Satan to do his job. Because it's not only his assignment to uphold justice, right? And to make sure that justice is done, but he gets something out of it. It's called a self-interest, that if he can get the Jew to sin, and the court finds him guilty, which means the heavenly court, then he could take from that, we know he could take from that Kedusha, holiness, and that's called Yeniko, he's unique. He feeds off that, and he grows. That's a obviously very strong motive for the Satan. But the truth is, this relationship that we have with evil, where we feed evil, means we contribute to its growth, or we can annihilate it. It's a fundamental relationship between us and the Satan, between the Jew and the Satan, between holiness and evil, so to speak. In any case, this is our relationship with the Satan, which I've said many times, but it's very important to understand this. Now, what is also important is that history revolves around this relationship. And I want to mention three tremendously historical events that really emerges is a consequence of our relationship with the Satan. And it's important because it does in many ways define, what the 3 weeks really are. The first idea that I would like to say is that when the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, that's about 2,400 years ago. It's probably about, the English, according to the secular, they think it's 586 BCE. But really it's not. It's probably much sooner than that. It's not as far back as that. It's probably something like 450 BCE. BCE means before Common Era. And that's when it happened. But the major idea that we know is that when that did happen, it can only have happened because of the Jews sinned. And we know that this Beis Hamikdash, the first one I should say, was destroyed. Why? So Chazal tell us, because they transgressed the 3 Averas sins for which one is obligated to give his life rather than transgress. And we know they are Gilia Royas, which is sexual promiscuity, incest, and so on. We have Shvichas Domim, which is murder, and Avodah Zarah, which is idol worship. And a Jew is obligated to give his life rather than transgress these 3 particular sins. In any case, apparently that generation was very guilty of these 3 sins, and therefore God decided to destroy the first Beis Hamikdash. So he had the Babylonians do it. They can't do anything on their own. They can only do it if there is a decree that allows them to be the agents of God. And unfortunately, this is what God did. But what is important to remember is the role of the Satan. Because remember, the Satan prosecutes. So obviously that's what he did. And because he prosecutes, right, he's able to take or nourish from those sparks of holiness. And it all depends on what he takes. What is interesting is that he was able to nourish from, right, the divine energy of God. Not that he could force God to do that, but justice demands that there has to be some type of appropriate, compensation for what the Jews did. So what the Satan said at that point in time, said, look, they're worshiping idols. They're doing those 3 sins which are terrible, so why should you stay amongst them? You see? So, therefore, he won in Bezdin, in the heavenly tribunal, and God allowed the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar to destroy the first Beis Hamikdash. But what does that mean? Was the Satan really interested in the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash? What he really wanted was to be able to take from the divine presence itself, right? And as a result of that, strengthen the whole argument or the temptation of Jews to sin further, you see. So what does he do? He grows in tremendous power because he's now taken from the divine energy. And as a result of that, he wants to, of course, increase the likelihood that Jews will sin so he can get more power. Now, if you remember, what the Satan was taking was divine sparks, but from the presence of the Shekhinah, the divine presence itself. And therefore, he was able to take that concept of the divine presence, right, and give it to Goyim. Very interesting. He was able to give the concept of a divine presence and give it to the Goyim. Where do we see this? Because he does that, he justifies it through dinim, through judgments. Where do we see that in history? Because within a 100-year period of time of the destruction of the First Temple, most of the religions of the world were founded. What are they? For instance, Buddhism, right? Buddha lived around that time. And there are hundreds of millions of Buddhists. Not only that, but Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism, the religion of China, you see, he lived at around that time. And not only that, those two, but Confucius. And Confucianism is a major religion in Far East. So you have those three. But not only was an understanding of the presence of God given to Goyim, you see, and that's when it was founded. But Chokhmah, because like it says in the Torah, Ki hi chokhmaschem ubinaschem, that the Torah is your wisdom and your discernment in the eyes of the Goyim. So therefore, besides receiving the permission to give to Goyim an understanding of the divine presence, he also was able to give to Goyim tremendous amount of chokhmah. How do we see that? Because the basic, the modern civilization, according to historians, is founded on Greeks, the Greek, approach to logic, science, philosophy. You had many great philosophers, Greek philosophers, who lived at that time. Who are they, for instance? We know there's Socrates, Plato, there's Aristotle, right? And there's other Parmenides, Pythagoras. That was a whole generation of Greek philosophy, right? Greek philosophers. And they were able to enormously expand on the chokhmah, on the intelligence and the brilliance, of human wisdom, and so on. So that was also given to the Goyim right around that time, because that's a Satan taking from what we have and giving it to Goyim, and hopefully that will attract Jews to sin. But not only that, there's a third element that the Satan was able to take. And what is that? Because the Jewish people are unique in the sense that they have these two attributes. One is called Tiferes, beauty, which is Chokhmah, wisdom. And the other thing is called might, Oiz, Tiferes and Oz, beauty and might. And might is really Hatzlacha, tremendous success. So he was able to take from that. So the Tiferes, right, beauty, the wisdom, that goes to the Greeks. Where did the Oiz go? And of course, the whole concept of the wisdom of theology also goes to the Goyim. But what's interesting is that in the West, might, tremendous hatzlacha, went to the Goyim. Who? Rome. The Etruscans took over Rome, Italy, I should say, approximately 800 BCE. And the Etruscans, whatever they were, a civilization that was in Italy before the Romans came, they were there till about 500 BCE. But right after 500 BCE, I think it's 525 BC, right around the time they destroyed the Beis Hamikdash, Rome became a republic. Yes, that was the beginning of Rome. And there you are. That's the ois. That's the might. So we see incredible, three things happen. One is the theology, the understanding of religion, presence of God, and so on, or metaphysics, if you want to call it that. And then there is philosophy, science, you see, of the Greeks, and architecture, literature, whatever, right? And then you have the might of Rome. All of this began at that time. Was this an accident? No. In fact, in Eicha, Yirmiyahu says the following, right? Soreha umalkeho. He's referring to the Jewish people, Israel. Soreha umalkeho. Her princes and her kings, Goyim, are captured by the Gentiles, right? That's one. Ein Torah. There is no Torah. V'gam nevi'eho lo motzu chazoin. And also her prophets do not see any prophetic visions. What is Yirmiyahu referring to? Exactly what I'm saying. He is saying that the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. Not only was it destroyed, but the key is that the Satan was able to urinate, feed off the energy of God, because God voluntarily allows them to do that, because justice demands that the Jews lose it. But the Satan gives it to the Goyim, so they can influence Jews to sin, and that's exactly what he did, both in the Far East, as I mentioned, and also in Europe, in the West, Rome. All of that happened. The major religions of the world, and there are hundreds of millions of people that observe these religions and so on, began, and Greek philosophy and Roman history and so on, all began at the time of the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. There you are. That is called the reciprocal relationship between the Jews and the Goy. The Jews and the Satan, I should say. You see. So we're talking about major events in world history, which is predicated on the relationship between the Satan and the Jewish people. Well, let's see. Any others? Yes. History is replete with our loss and their gain, because that's the deal that the Satan has, that he can grow when the Jews sin. The second interesting tekufa, again, is the destruction of the second temple. And that happened, we know, approximately about 70 CE. CE means Common Era. Right? That's when it happened. That the second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. You see. Now, it was destroyed because, as the Chazal tell us, sinas chinam, groundless or baseless hatred. Yes. And incidentally, which is very important, the Chofetz Chaim and the Maharsha say that it's not the sinas chinam as such, but it is the lashon hara that is generated by the baseless hatred. That's what destroyed the second temple. But in any case, we know this is a major event in Jewish history, obviously. This is a major event because that's really the beginning of what? Of the Golus, the exile, the diaspora of the Jewish people. Now we know, wait a minute, who stands to benefit? Obviously it's a tremendous loss. We lost the second temple. I don't want to go into what that meant to the Jews. Obviously it was outstanding and so on. But we know the benefit goes to the Satan, because he is able to urinate again. He is able to take from the holiness of the Jew those sparks of holiness, right? And urinate and take from it. And since we lost the divine presence, right? He's able to take that concept of the divine presence and again present it to the Goyim. But as a what? The same way he did it also at the time of the first Beis Hamikdash, as a major religion. a major understanding of the presence of God, the nature of God, and so on. And that is why, right around that time, right, when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, Christianity evolved, was founded. And what is interesting is that Yeshu lived approximately, he died in 33 CE. Young guy, but he obviously died because he was convicted as for treason, as somebody trying to overthrow the Roman government. That's why he was killed. In any case, right around the time that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, the major works of Christianity were written. There was Paul, who most of the works that he did, the letters of Paul and so on, is approximately 60 CE. Then you have the Gospels. You have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They were written between 70 CE and 95 or 100 CE. That's just around the time the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. Now, what's interesting is Christianity is a religion that has wiped out. We don't even begin to know how many Jews were killed by the Christians, you see. Now, what we do understand is why. Because Christianity is a result of the loss of the second Beis Hamikdash. That is the Satan taking from the energy of the presence of God and giving it to the Goyim, obviously to benefit himself, because the amount of agony and anguish and pain that they cause the Jews is not even calculable. But in any case, this is what they did, you see. And again, it's the reversal. We lost the second Beis Hamikdash. They gained a major religion. But what they gained was not just a major religion, Christianity, but it was a religion that's much closer to the truth. Because Christianity basically, depending on which stage of the history of Christianity, believes in not polytheism, many gods, right? But they believe in, they say it's one God, but it's really three gods, the Trinity and so on, without getting into that. But it's much closer to the truth, because even they, at some level, say there's basically whatever they call it, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, whatever that means. In any case, that this is closer to the truth because they fundamentally believe that there is God, except he's got parts, whatever. So it's much closer to the truth than is polytheism, which is the belief in many gods. So that's what the Satan does. He brought that religion to the Goyim, and he's hoping to influence, certainly to just punish whatever Jews for their infractions or violations. So therefore, that's another major event that we suffered, you see, and with the destruction of the Second Temple, whereas the Goyim benefited because they have a religion which is closer to the emes. You see, it's closer to the truth. So that again is a result. We're talking about major events in history. These are not little local events. I mean, Christianity, in many ways, is one of the most successful religions that the world has ever seen. There's 2 billion Christians, you see. There's approximately 1 billion Roman Catholics, and there's another billion, the other denominations of Christianity. But it's a very successful religion, and this basically comes about because this is the transfer of our Kedusha, our energy, to the Satan. So this relationship that we have with the Satan is pivotal in understanding many events of the world. And I will tell you one more, which is fascinating, and that is, in order to understand that, I had mentioned this previously, but there is a concept called the creation calendar. Now we know the Gemara says that Shisa Alfei Shnin, that Hevu Alma, that the world will last 6,000 years, because it was created in 6 days. And each 1,000 years is 1 day in the eyes of God. So therefore, 6 days of creation will equal 6,000 years, which means that the world will last until the English year 2240, which is the year 6,000. Now, what is important in that calendar, many, many fascinating ideas, but what is important in that calendar is Friday, that means 5 days will have elapsed. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday will have elapsed. Friday is the 6th day, which is Erev Shabbos. And that corresponds to the English year, right? The English year 1240. So 1240 is, on the creation calendar, 6 p.m. Thursday night. And that's the beginning of the last day, which is Friday, Erev Shabbos, right? So we can expect certain tremendous events that happen, you see, especially when we look at the relationship between the Jewish people and the Satan, you see. Now, what happened is that on Erev Shabbos, which is Thursday at 6 p.m., right, English year 1240, that is the Hebrew year 5000, that is a pivotal time in the world history. And the Zohar says something very interesting. It says that the Messianic Light begins to come down on that year, 1240, approximately. Why? Because Erev Shabbos is when you begin to prepare for Shabbos, right? That's when people begin to think about Shabbos, right? The last day, which is the 6th day of the week. And people begin to think about Shabbos, as I said. And therefore, the Messianic Light comes down in preparation for the Messianic era. So that also happens, is what the Zohar says. That in the 6th day, the beginning of the 6th day, I should say, the Messianic Light enters creation. Therefore, we can expect that in the year 1240, the Messianic Light comes down. Now, it's not because of the Jews, it's because this is the timetable of the world. You see, like I said, 6 days of creation, 6,000 years for the Jews to do the Tikkun. You see. So therefore, in preparation for the Messianic era, which is in the end of the 6th day, as I will explain, the Messianic Light begins to come down. What is the Messianic Light? That's the interesting concept. Well, the Messianic Light, in very simple, general terms, is the ability to see internal causes, the internal structure of Chokhmah. That's really what it is. In fact, if you want to know what it is, let's put it this way. In terms of Judaism, it's the understanding of the internal structure of the Torah. Because remember one thing, is that a mitzvah is a trigger to an or, a light. That's really what it is. There are 613 mitzvahs because there are 613 triggers that release the lights of the spheres, because there are 613 parts of the spheres. So every time you do a mitzvah, you release the corresponding energy, divine energy of the sphere that corresponds to that mitzvah. And the mitzvah is the trigger. It's the switch that releases that or, you see. So therefore, that is the Messianic Light. We will understand every single mitzvah, what it does, and how it corresponds and parallels, right, and interfaces with the entire understanding of the 10 forces of God. This is the study of Kabbalah. Kabbalah is the Messianic Light. That's really what it is, because it reveals the inner workings, the inner mechanism of all reality, that it is rooted in the spheres of God. This is a study of Kabbalah, you see. So that's really what the Messianic Light is. And according to Kabbalah, it began to descend, or rather to influence the world in the year approximately 5000, which is the year 1240, right, which is on the creation clock or calendar, the beginning of the 6th day, Erev Shabbos. But wait a minute. If that's the case, right, then that Chokhmah, the ability to see the internal structure, is not only true of Kabbalah, of Jewish perspective, but it's also true of the study of the physical universe, right? Because remember what I said, the Messianic light is like a magnifying glass. It enables you to see the micro of the macro, you see, where you can see the internal structure, the ultimate causes of all reality. But just like there's the relationship between mitzvahs and Kabbalistic spheres, there is also the relationship between the laws of physics, chemistry, biology, and the spheres. But even without the spheres, what about the internal structure of these disciplines? And that's called science. Guess what? That also comes down. Because the whole power of science, which is an amazing concept, is nothing more than the Messianic light coming down. Except, if it goes to the Jews, it's in the form of Kabbalah. But if it goes to Goyim, then it's in the form of science. Both of which can be understood in terms of the internal structure of either the physical universe or the spiritual universe also. You see, that's a very important concept. Now, the problem is that the Jews are sinning so many times, right? And as a result of that, the Satan is able to take from this power of the Messianic light and give it to Goyim. Why? Because he wants people to think that the world came on its own, you see, and therefore, what do you need to observe mitzvahs for? When the natural order of the world, right, is on its own, it's automatic. So he uses science, right, in order to promote the fact that there is no God, chas v'shalom, God forbid, right? But on the contrary, everything is natural, it's automatic, it can be explained with laws of science and so on. That's what he gets out of it. So therefore what happens is, since the Messianic light came down in the English year of 1240, right, which is the Hebrew year 5000, right, which is Friday morning, Thursday at 6 p.m., it went to both sides. Is this true historically? And the answer is yes. The side of the Jews, because the Zohar was found approximately it actually was found earlier, but let's say 1290, when Moshe de Leon discovered the Zohar, and that is the primary textbook of all Kabbalah. So it was actually found approximately around that time. So that's in terms of the Messianic light for Jews. What about science, which is the Messianic light for Goyim, because it describes the physical universe, the internal structure of the physical universe? What about that? And the answer is also happened, because the father of the scientific method, his name was Roger Bacon. He lived in the year 1240. He's the one who got away from Aristotle, because Aristotle was an armchair scientist. Didn't do any experiments. He just thought about it, and he tried to come up with explanations. But Roger Bacon got away from that, and he says, wait a minute, there's a thing called the scientific method. And he discovered it, and he promoted it. So the beginning of the ability to get away from Aristotelian thought, right, was actually around that year, you see. So amazingly so, both Kabbalah and modern science, which is when it really started then, both happened at the same century, which is amazing when you think about that. Why? Like I said, because in the year 5000, which is the English year 1240, which is the creation calendar, Thursday night 6 p.m., which is the beginning of Erev Shabbos, the Zohar says that the Messianic light begins to come down. And both events transpire because the Messianic Light is the engine of both secular science and Kabbalistic understanding of Judaism. That is what happened. And again, it's a result. What happened was that the Satan, since the Jews are sinning, is able to take science and make it grow tremendously. And this is what happens because he wants to convince people, right? So think about that. Then you get to the year 1740. Now 1740 is dawn of Friday morning. It's another 500 years, because 500 years, right, equals 12 hours. So at 6 a.m. Friday morning is dawn of the sixth day. In fact, it's the last day. So approximately around that time, 1740, right, since the Satan was taking so much, he was urinating so much, he was able to take from that and give it to Goyim. So what events happened around that time to increase tremendously the growth of modern science? Isaac Newton. He lived right before that time, and Newton, of course, according to scientists, is the father of modern science, one of the greatest scientists who ever lived. He's an absolutely brilliant person. And he lived right before that, and not only that, but there was also somebody, Francis Bacon, who improved, also lived a little before that. He improved on the scientific method. He really brought it to a tremendous finishing touch. And that increased, again, enormously the whole concept of the scientific method, hypothesis and experimentation and so on. And both of these things were, of course, in the 17th century, you see, right before dawn of the creation calendar. It's amazing when you think about that. And then by the time you get to 1840, there's another Zohar that says, in the 600th year of the life of Noach, right, the flood happened. It poured out. It said that the waters in the upper regions poured out, and the waters in the lower regions, they poured out also, and they flooded the earth. That is the Mabul. So the Zohar says that this indicates that in the 600th year, just like by Noach, it was the 600th year of the life of Noach. Therefore, in the 600th year, right, of the 5th millennium, which is 5,600, the Orishan, the Messianic Light, will begin to pour out with unbelievable amount of clarity and discovery. Did it happen? Yes. Because 5,600, right, is Netzach, basically, is sunrise of the last day, Erev Shabbos, right? You have dawn at the year 5,500. Then another 100 years later, you have what's called Netzach, which is the sunrise, right? Which is another pivotal idea in the creation calendar. What year was that? 1840, right? That's 5,600, and that is recognized as the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, approximately. And that's when science really began to grow. You had the great physicist Michael Faraday, and you had James Clerk Maxwell. It was just an incredible, prolific time for science. And that happened at sunrise of the last day, you see. And that's because the Satan is unique. He's taken from our Messianic Light, you see. And that's what the Zohar says, that the Chochmah of the Mashiach is going to come down in incredible volume. But if we don't deserve it, and this is, by the way, the Kotzke Maggid says this. I think it's the Kotzke Maggid, or is it maybe the Koznitzer Maggid, says that according to that Zohar, if the Jews deserve it, there will be a tremendous amount of divine light, Kabbalistic energy, Kabbalistic light the Messianic light and so on, that'll happen. But if the Jews don't deserve it, it will go to the Goyim. How? As science. Unfortunately, it went to the Goyim and basically not to the Jews. And that's why science proliferated with such enormous amount of success. And then it grew, of course, at the end of the century with Einstein and Max Planck and all the other guys and so on and so on. And this is the beginning of modern day science and so on. But what it really is, and most people don't realize, science is nothing more than the Messianic light directed to the physical universe. That's really what it is. And science does not grow unless there is no Messianic light coming down. Unfortunately, the Satan is using it, right, in order to persuade Jews to sin. And of course, one of the greatest, I hate to call him an atheist because he wasn't. He was a priest or minister, whatever you call him. Darwin, Charles Darwin. He wrote his book, I think, Origin of Species, I think was in 1858. That's right around that time. And that was a major upheaval in the belief of God. Because people said, well, you don't need God for this. You have evolution. That's what's responsible for the origin of life and for the origin of species. That's it. You see? So I always find it to be, really paradoxical that a minister, a Christian minister is responsible for creating a theory, right, that ruined people's belief in a God. Because that's what evolution did. It allowed mankind to have an excuse not to believe in God, because now they had an alternative way that the life came about, the origin of species came about. It just destroyed emunah, even among Goyim. But that all happened at around 1840, which is sunrise of the last day. Again, it's the Satan using the Messianic light, right, to get Jews to sin and to get the world to become more atheistic, which will then again also influence Jews to sin, you see. And this is what is going on. It's all about the Messianic light in the end, and it's about the Satan's ability to take from this light, this energy, and give it to the Goyim, or give it to the world, whatever, when the Jews sin, and therefore he could be yoinek from that Kedusha. And I want to just tell you now, what is happening today is beyond belief. You see, why? Because as we get closer, we have passed another pivotal time period, which is Sunday, 12 o'clock noon. And that's Chatzois. 12 o'clock noon Sunday, right? Not Sunday, Friday. And what is happening is the Messianic light is coming down. The energy of that divine light, that Messianic light and so on, the Orishan, the first light, is coming down with tremendous amount of volume and so on. The problem is it's going to the Goyim, not to the Jews, because we are very much into the Golas and so on. And that is why science is growing by leaps and bounds. When you think about it, you go into an electronics store in one year, you come back a year later, the whole store changed, different products. The growth of science is something that the world has never seen. The proliferation of ideas, entire industries rise and fall inside 1 year. The hatzlach of scientists to understand the physical reality is beyond belief. I mean, there wasn't much of a difference between there was a, if you think about it, between somebody who lives in today and somebody who lived 2,000 years ago, right? There wasn't that much of a difference. Mankind, grew and so on, but there was not, the change of mankind wasn't rapid. Today, right, the difference between, let's say, 1840, right, and 2012, you can't even recognize the difference in society, in civilization. That's how much they've advanced. And that's all due to the Messianic light coming down, being used by the Satan. He's taken from that energy of the Messianic Light, give it to the Goyim, and it's all about, the advancement of science, which he's hoping, of course, to influence Jews to sin. That's what he's hoping. So this is happening today. In fact, I once read, and I read this a long time ago, maybe 25 years ago, where it said that the sum total of human knowledge doubles every 5 years. You believe this? Doubles every 5 years. That's how much information is coming. And every year, every day, 7,500 journal articles are published daily. And that's where the progress of science is in journal articles. So every day, 7,500 articles are published. Do you imagine the unbelievable proliferation of human knowledge? And therefore the sum total of human knowledge doubles every 5 years. I mean, it's just beyond belief, because this is the Messianic Light. But the Satan is taking from it and giving it to the Goyim. Unfortunately, the Jews do not really have that, even though there's a lot of, there's Sforim being written and so on, but you cannot even compare the advancement of Judaism compared to the advancement of science. Again, this is the result of the relationship between the Satan and the Jewish people. People think, well, this is the normal advancement of mankind. No, it's not. It takes a divine force to move the world forward. And what has moved the world, basically, you see, especially the last 1,000 years, is the Messianic Light, which is an understanding of the internal structure, right, of creation. That's really what it is. We have to hope that this will be restored, that the Messianic Light will come down, of course, which it is doing, and that it will be directed at the Jewish people, and therefore they will grow in a way which we cannot even begin to comprehend. Because if this is what's happening to science, to the laws of physics and chemistry and biology and so on, right? If this is the amount of information that the Messianic Light yields to the secular world, right? Could you imagine what it will yield to the Jewish world when it's attached to the Torah? Could you imagine the amount of knowledge that will be understood by everybody? The knowledge of Kabbalah, of the spiritual universes, right? Spiritual reality, how much wisdom there is. Yes, we are going to be privy to that. All in hopefully the Messianic era. And I once quoted this, that the Medrash Rabbi at the end of Koheles, what it says is this, that the amount of Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, which is everything we have, it's the Babylonian Talmud, Jerusalem Talmud, it's Shulchan Aruch, it's everything, Shelis and Shuvas Forum, the Chiltas, the Frost, the Frey, whatever, right? So the Medrash says that the amount of knowledge that will happen to the Jewish people, which happened, I should say, at the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, is nothing. He calls it Luft Hevel, which is air. It's Hevel. It doesn't even have substance compared to the amount of knowledge that will happen in the Messianic era. Can you imagine what that means? That means we don't even begin to understand what the Messianic era is. And that is the end of time. Like I said, the world will end in the year 6000, the English year 2240. We are now at the English year, right, of 2022, right? So what do we have left? We have 218 years to go. That the growth of wisdom will be beyond comprehension, because we can see the parallel. If this is what the Goyim, the secular world, knows, the advancement is so great, right? Could you imagine what the advancement will be in the Jewish world, Kabbalistic thinking, And right now we don't know how that's going to happen. But we can just judge by its parallel in the secular world of science and so on. And that same Medrash says the following, that the Messianic Light, the amount of wisdom at the time of the Mashiach, that itself is hevel, is luft, air, and it doesn't even have a substance compared to the amount of knowledge that we will all gain in Olam Haba, the future world. So imagine, from Judaism to the Messianic era, and from the Messianic era to Olam Haba, the future world, the amount of information will be stupendous. And I will end with just a brief story that incredibly illustrates this. The Ari was once learning with a student. The great Ari, Yitzchak Ashkenazi, was learning with a student on Shabbos, whatever, and the Ari put his head down, and it looked like he fell asleep. And the student, like, he didn't know what to do. He didn't want to wake up the Ari. You don't do that, right? And all of a sudden he hears the Ari mumbling to himself. So he thought maybe he's mumbling in his sleep. Right? That's what the Ari is doing. So what he did was, he didn't want to wake up the Ari, but he wanted to hear what the Ari was saying. Because the mumblings of the Ari is greater than the discourses of sages. In any case, so he put his head down near the mouth of the Ari to listen. What was the Ari saying? Even if it's in his sleep. So all of a sudden the Ari woke up. He obviously put his ear too close, and the Ari woke up, and the Talmud obviously was very nervous. So the Ari saw that. He says, no, it's okay, don't worry, everything's okay. So the Talmud got a little more courage, and he says, wait a minute, you were sleeping, and you were mumbling. What was that all about? So the Ari says, I did not go to sleep. What I did is I thought of a divine name, Kavona, and I ascended, my consciousness ascended to Olam Yetzirah, which is the world right above us. Because I remained here, but I ascended, my consciousness ascended to the world of Yetzirah, you see. And but I was not sleeping. And then in that world is the residence of many of the angels. So an angel came over to me, and he asked me, what would I like to do? There's a lot of lectures, Shiurim going on, you see. And he asked the Ari, whose lecture would you like to go to? So the Ari asked him, who's giving the lecture? So if I recall correctly, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was giving a lecture. And, so the Ari asked him, really? What's he lecturing on? So the angel told him he's lecturing on Parshas Bolok, right? Parsha in the Torah, right? He told that to the Ari. So the Ari told him, I would like to listen to that lecture. So the angel transported him, rather his consciousness, to that lecture. And he's sitting there and listening to a lecture in heaven by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. You see? And so the Ari tells his student what my mumbling was. So I was mumbling what Rabbi Shimon was saying in the lecture. So the Ari, the student got very excited because he wanted to know, what does the Torah in that world sound like? Obviously it can't be the same. So he asked the Ari, what was he saying? See, the Ari says the following: if I had 80 years to write what I heard in whatever time I was up there, 10 minutes, whatever, right? I could not complete the amount of information that Rabbi Shimon was saying in that lecture. Imagine that. If I had 80 years to write it down, I could not write down all the information that he was saying. That shows you how much information there is concealed, right, in the Messianic Light. We're not even talking about the future world, you see. Now, we know, Parshas Bolok. If you wrote down all the commentaries on Parshas Bolok, What would it equal? Just that parsha. 1,000 pages? 2,000 pages? That's all it would equal, right? You see? So that's what he said, right? Imagine how much information there is, if that's how long it would take, right? 80 years to write down, just a Parshas Balak. By the way, this story is brought down in the Shivchei, the Ari. But anyway, Baruch Chaim Vital. In any case, we see a tremendous thing, and we can draw the parallel. If the world of science has changed, in a quantum way, it's not an arithmetic growth, it's not even a geometric growth, it's an exponential growth that the world of science has grown. From what? About 100 years, 150 years, right? So if its parallel, which is the Messianic Light in the Jewish world, if this is what it sounds like, 80 years worth, could you imagine how much information is missing and how much information the world will see, not just the Jews. That's what it says, Kimola Oretz Deo, and the world will be filled with the knowledge of God as the waters, means all the oceans, covers the seabed, right? Now, 3/4 of the planet is covered with water, but to a depth of what? I don't know, about 7-8 miles. Can you imagine how much water there is? So could you imagine how much knowledge of God there will be if that's the parallel, right? If that's the analog, like the waters covers the seabed? Yes. We have no idea how that's possible. We have no idea how much information that is. We don't even know how it's possible to absorb that amount of information in the short amount of time that the Mashiach will be around. But in any case, whatever it is, therefore we see something very important. The major events of the world is basically the relationship between the Satan and the Jewish people. And I've only brought out just a couple of them. But the truth is that all history is predicated on that relationship, you see. And this is very important because one of the things we grieve for is that the destruction of the temple was wrought by the sins of the Jews. And because of the relationship that we have with the Satan, right, that is what we have lost. In other words, not only have we lost the Beis Hamikdash, right, but what the Goyim have gained because of our loss, the ability in many ways to distract us, to destroy us, you see. Now, there are obviously many other concepts and ideas that are important, and so on. For instance, Christianity is one of the major ways, this is called the Rambam, to spread the concepts of Judaism, because paganism does not believe in a Messiah. It does not believe in a redemption. You see, it believes once you die, it's over with. You see, so Christianity differed or denied the tenets of polytheism. So there was a very useful service that God used once the Satan took it to the Goyim to promote the true religion, Judaism and so on. So there's obviously a great deal more to think about in terms of what was God's purpose besides giving the Satan the ability. God himself has tremendous amount of benefits from that, as God always does, and so on. But in any case, without getting into any of that, so we understand this is really, in many ways, the grief that we experience. Not only we lost the divine presence, but the Goyim have gained the wherewithal to destroy us, to hamper us, to make it impossible for us to observe Judaism, you see. And this, of course, will all end when the exile ends, which hopefully will be right around the corner. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Rabbi. So I have a couple of questions. One, okay, so you said when the Mashiach does come, and we do start to get this wealth of knowledge from the Messianic Light, does it come in levels, or does everyone receive the same amount?
Well, in the Messianic era, everybody, seems to be clear that everybody will be privy to the same information. I don't see a difference. But remember one thing. It's not just knowledge and information. In the Messianic era, you actually experience the information that you received. Because together with the information is a gilui, is a revelation that you actually experience. And that will probably be unequal. I mean, there will be an awesome amount, no question about that. But probable the amount of avodah you did, the amount of worship that you did with God, will make you differ with other people in terms of what you are actually experiencing. But as far as the information itself, it would seem that everybody will have that information.
So now with science, I mean, technology has taken a big step forward in the science realm. So
yes.
Isn't that one of the biggest ways that Satan traps us as Jews? I mean, of course, as everyone, but Jews specifically.
Yes, that's exactly what I said. What he gains is the ability to convince us to drop God, drop the mitzvahs, drop Judaism, and believe in Darwin, believe in science, because everything is natural, you don't need a religion, and so on. That's what he wants. Believe me, he's not interested in giving the world chokhmah, technology, science and technology. He wants to use it to convince you of an alternative to the reality you believe in, and hopefully that you will sin. It's like a knife. In the hands of a killer, it will kill. But in the hands of a surgeon, it will cure, right? But the knife itself can be used either way. Same thing. I always find it interesting that, even though there's such a proliferation of science, the truth is, when you read the science, you realize, how could all of this have come about by chance? It's impossible. And on the contrary, like it says, Ma'rova Ma'asecha Hashem, how great is your handiwork, and how deep is the understanding of what God did. On the contrary, if a person would learn science in the correct way, he would realize all of this can only be because of a creator. I mean, just take a look at the human body. Just take a look at insects. The millions of different insects, how they each survive, and they have unique abilities to survive. How did they get this? I mean, there are books written on this. It's astounding. None of this is all plan and purpose and design. This can't come about through chance. So what's interesting is that even if you studied science, if you did it in the right way, you would actually become a greater believer than not. So even science is a path toward religion and belief in God.
Okay. So let's say we continue as Jews to live on the path of handing over the sparks of holiness to Satan. In what way are we going to be able to experience this Messianic light for him to, not get it anymore? Because, like we said, there's so many Jews that are gone, how we're going to be able to regain, the power of those holy sparks?
Well, you have to remember one thing. The Satan will be annihilated. That's the critical idea. Because if he's not annihilated, you're right, we can't gain it. So he dies. Would that mean he literally dies? Or he becomes a good angel, whatever that means. But the whole concept of evil is annihilated. It's over. That means there's no such thing as evil anymore. And therefore, there's no distractions, right? There's no, myth. There's no false arguments and so on. It's all gone. Just like there's no death, right? We know that. There's no disease. There's no sickness. It's like what Chazal call, which is a beautiful way of saying it, in the Messianic era, although they also refer to it in the future world, Yom Shekulei Toiv. On that day, it will be all good. You'll never have a mishap. You'll never have a problem in the Messianic era. It's all phenomenal. You see? So this can only take place if there's no Satan. And he's gone. He's eradicated. It's over with. It's all good.
So from last week, I got cut off with my questions. I wasn't able to ask them. So I'm going to ask a couple of them now.
Yeah.
We're speaking about last week how the Satan has 3 strategies to live. And he was dying off, but he's on the last leg of being allied with Edom, with Ishmael.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, Ishmael, right.
Right. So my question is that's on a grander scale, and that's on the world stage. But does the Satan do that personally to us? Does he use those same strategies?
I'm not exactly sure what you mean, does he use the strategies to us?
Okay, you know he said he does the great bluff first, and then he tries to start a war, and then you said he does. Then once he's starting to die off, then he starts to ally with other nations. But
right.
does he try to do that within us to get our personal holy sparks? Meaning, like
actually, he does. You know who that is? If you remember, the second strategy was that he gets dissidents to go into the nation to convince them not to make a war. So that corresponds to the second strategy, which is the Erev Rav. He sends his guys that want to dismiss Torah, which is the essential idea of all Judaism. He wants to get rid of that. He uses the Erev Rav. Who are the Erev Rav, which I think I mentioned? In America, it's the Reformed movement, the conservative movement, right? The Reconstructionist movement. It's all those movements that have destroyed Judaism. And in Israel, the Erev Rav, in Israel, it's the Zionists, the secular Zionists, who want to replace Israel, right, with Judaism, because they say, well, we don't need Judaism. We have a distinct Israeli culture, right? That's all we need. That's what the Erev Rav wants. They want to become a nation like every other nation. That's what Israel is always planning, you see, is to become a nation like every others. That's why whenever you go to some Israeli institution, they're always trying to imitate New York. You see. That's what they're always trying to do, you see. But that's who they use. They use the Erev Rav, or the Satan uses the Erev Rav to do his job. But that's what he uses. So it's really the same concept. He uses an ally, you see, and that ally is the Erev Rav. But ultimately he needs sparks, you see, because of his ally, the Erev Rav, cannot convince the Jews to sin, so he's bankrupt. It's not going to help him. He uses the Erev Rav to convince the Jews to sin. That's what he does, you see. But if they don't sin, then he's lost. He's bankrupt, you see. So, but with Yishmael, he's able to take from their Kedusha, or their energy that they take directly from God, because of what Avraham Avinu said, and so on. So it's very similar, although not exactly the same.
Okay, so that allied relationship that they have with Ishmael, how long could it last? Does it have a time frame?
Obama's still active, and that explains why he's still active. Because it's an amazing way that the Satan got around the fact that a president can only be for 2 terms. Because he put the guy like Biden in, who don't know what he's doing, and so on, you know. It's hard to know, but I believe it'll end. I believe Trump will come back in 2024 and bust up the whole party. I believe that's what's going to happen. And I sure hope he goes after all these guys that literally try to destroy him. And they're doing that now. And that's when it will end, you know. Because then Edom, which Trump is the Tov Shebe'esav, he will begin the real process of helping the Jews do the Tikkun. So what do we have? We had 2.5 years to go.
So
right?
the Mashiach you don't can't really come during that time? Does the world stage have to be in that
remember
that
one
phase
thing.
for it to come?
Yeah, I'll tell you. You have to remember one thing. I don't refer to the Mashiach coming. I refer to the beginning of the Messianic era, when all of a sudden it turns upward. See, the critical thing is to get rid of the evil and to give hatzlacha to good. The problem is that the good is not successful, or it's minimally successful. This is the problem, that evil in the end dominates completely. Where evil people dominate, evil institutions dominate, you see. And that is, of course, very bad. The turnaround is when all of a sudden evil fails. For some reason it's just not working. And not only that, not only does evil fail, but the good begins to be successful. You see, that's what we're looking for. When does the evil stop being successful, and when does the forces of good achieve ascendancy, when they will be successful? That is the beginning of the Messianic era, but the Mashiach then, he's just come out of prison. That's called the Pekidah, you see. But he's got a way to go before he actually becomes what he really is. So I don't look at in terms of when the Mashiach in his full-blown regalia, so to speak. No. I look, when does evil stop being successful, and when does the good begin to emerge and be victorious? That's the key. Because once that happens, it's irrevocable and unstoppable. That's the key. And that's what we're waiting for. The development itself, it'll take time. But what we want to do is see an end to the hatzlacha, to the success of evil. That's the problem. You see what I'm saying?
So in the time frame, in the 2.5 years that we still have left of Biden's term, the Pekidah could happen, and the Mashiach could start, growing on his own. So
yes.
Where we see on the world stage won't be for, time after that, once we see evil, dissipating and, good winning. So in the time frame what we're really waiting for right now in this time frame is the Pekidah to happen.
Right. When he can break out of his prison, and then once he's free, the Mashiach ben Yosef has to enter the stage called rehabilitation. He's got to be rehabilitated like anybody else. He suffered enough, and now he's got to stop suffering and actually enter the phase called rehabilitation. And that's how he comes to himself, you see. So what we're looking for is the emergence from the prison that he's been in, and the rehabilitation when he begins to grow.